Well, Coinbase just made the conversation impossible to ignore for serious institutions, not because they just published another crypto opinion piece, but because its independent advisory board on quantum computing and blockchain that includes prominent names like Scott Aronson, Dan Boneh, Justin Drake, Sriram Kannan, Yehuda Lindell, and Dalia Malki have put out in writing something that the market can no longer wave away. They released a position paper that says quantum computing cannot be dismissed. The threat is not imminent, but now is the time to start preparing. It's getting on the horizon, and post-quantum migration is needed at all levels. Consensus, execution, user wallets, all of it has to go. Coinbase then makes the line that every institution should hear. It's waiting for it to be urgent is not a good idea. The paper says that preparation has to start before it's urgent and before urgency arrives, because decentralized ecosystems may potentially take years to coordinate, to test, and it warns that uncertainty around migration choices is already deterring some investment. So this is where our episode discussion starts, with Coinbase at the anchor. And once Coinbase is the anchor, the next question is then unavoidable. What does that mean for institutions that are already issuing, custodying, settling, scaling long duration value assets on-chain today, and what does it mean for those that are about to come? That is where Google quantified the blast radius, and EternaX turns that into diagnosis and solution. Today we are in the control loop with me, Paarrthhh, my co-founder of EternaX, and let's dive in.
So, there's never a slow week, Dariia, in the crypto space. I think we were looking at Google reports and the other reports coming in 2 weeks back, and then suddenly after some time, within 2-3 weeks, we have a report from the Coinbase Advisory Committee. And as you have already mentioned, Dariia, the names are something that you cannot. Scott Aronson, Dan Boneh, Justin Drake, Sriram Kannan, and everybody else. These are the, I would say, the stalwarts of the quantum computing space, and they come in from a large experience, and if they are saying something, it's something that needs to be taken seriously. Justin Drake, again, is a repeat name. He also came in the Google report. So what we are trying to convey here is that these people have spent years in the same space. So whatever claims that they are making in the Coinbase report as well as in the Google report needs to be taken very, very seriously. So the threats are real, as you have already mentioned, Dariia. I would want you to strip away the noise. And if the reader does not want to read the Coinbase report, which we again will link in the description for them for ease, what is the message?
Yeah, and it's pretty long one, but would say there's 3 most important messages. One of them that may come as a hope for a lot of people is that crypto is safe today, but to start preparing is already coming, and it is now. So the public summary says that the likely timeline will likely still be at least a decade, practically, technically, but we cannot rule out a meaningfully shorter time of arrival of a quantum computer capable of attacking today's crypto. And the advisory board is clear that the migration planning should already start way before the market is forced into it, because urgency is also dangerous in these situations. Second that I would highlight would be that it's not just user wallet stories. The paper specifically highlights that the migration is essential at every level. It's consensus level, execution level, validator signing, user transaction signing. Proof of stake systems have even more validator signature exposure than, for example, proof of work systems. So every blockchain is going to have to assess their stack very, very carefully, because it also kind of depends on different ones. There's like Zcash is different stack from Ethereum, has a different stack from Bitcoin, but all of them are vulnerable in different degrees. The third important point is that Coinbase says that the hard part is actually the deployment, not the mass, not the research, not the cryptography. The cryptography exists and it's approved by NIST, and there is a lot of development, there is a lot of optimization there. But the biggest problem for blockchain specifically is the signature size. That directly translates into performance loss. The threshold signing, for example, that's very used in a lot of blockchains, is not yet supported for NIST signatures. There is a few paper, but it's not implemented anywhere. What are your migration strategies? How are you going to coordinate validators? How are you going to coordinate every single user moving their wallets? How are you going to coordinate ecosystem, hardware wallets? How are you going to do like all the RPCs and all of that? What do you do about lost coins, the dormant wallets? For instance, do you lift them out to be attacked by quantum? Do you burn them? Do you freeze them? Those are real challenges, and the list of challenges is slightly different for every different ecosystem. So it's not the point is that quantum breaks crypto tomorrow. The point is that the industry should start acting today and stop acting like this preparation can be just done without cost. There is a lot to be assessed technically, both and economically. And it may take years that people should start moving.
Definitely, Dariia. I think this is exactly on the lines that we have been, for the past, I would say 2-3 months, we have been saying, and there are a lot of articles on this particular thing. So migration strategy becomes migration debt. And that is what we have been mentioning, and that what is the migration debt, and then signature size and performance is basically the PQC size problem, which we have stressed a lot, and that is where you see Solana's decline of 90% of the TPS, and that does not make sense. So this is exactly the things that we have been sharing, Dariia, and what I want for the listeners to highlight as well here is that we have been on the top of this, and the validation has come from the Google report, and the validation for our processes and our thoughts have come from the strongholds and stalwarts like of Coinbase advisory team and Google teams. It's all that has been supported by Coinbase and Google. So this is one point I would like, Dariia, to highlight here is that when you say, the Coinbase report definitely says that, there is that quantum computing will be achieved completely in say 10 years, but they still say that they cannot rule out under any circumstances that it can happen any earlier also. And just to give highlight pointers here is that Google decided that their timeline for PQC has basically the post-quantum shift, cryptography shift is 2029. Cloudflare again has decided that their timeline to PQC is 2029. So this is very critical for people to understand, because a lot of traffic goes through these guys. And if they are deciding on something as a date, this should be the last date on which every institution should know that this is the last date that they should keep in mind as a deadline. Because if there is money involved which can be stolen, which can be lost just because you did not prepare, I think that is a very big issue. So the institutions have to pay great attention to this. And when we say this thing, Dariia, the Coinbase is the anchor for our narrative and the thought process. So where does Google take it further for the institutions from here, Dariia?
Right, with Coinbase and Google both saying these things, and Google's practically acting on their predictions of quantum computer advancements. They said they are going to migrate all of their internal systems and users and like Gmail and all of the services that they provide to people to post-quantum cryptography within the next 2 to 3 years. And so it has to be taken seriously, and that's the conversation that needs to be started, taken seriously today. In Google's report that they have released on was March 30, 2026, they discussed that it needs to get wider than just like Bitcoin or just like Ethereum, because all of industry is systemically vulnerable with different implications, specifically for like stablecoins and tokenizations, assets that have been underexplored initially in all of the kind of crypto post-quantum sort of discussions. There's a very big difference there, because like Bitcoin and Ethereum, they specifically derive their value from the chain. But if you talk about stablecoins and tokenizations, this is our assets that derive their value from something outside in the world, whatever is the asset that they are tokenizing, be it dollars or be it like securities. But they now take on the security risks of the chains that they are building on. Fiat-backed stablecoins and tokenization are expanding the pool of assets that are governed now by smart contracts, which have their keys exposed that could be attacked by quantum computers, and it can grow already in nearly an order of magnitude as projected by 2030. This tokenization is also opens more markets on top of building on that are projected to exceed up to 16 trillion by 2030, which is vastly is again order of magnitude of all the crypto industry today almost. But the cryptographic rails still remain quantum vulnerable. So Google has explicitly warned that this could push the exposed value way above being too risky and too big to fail for economic stability thresholds. They also quantified specifically like for Ethereum smart contracts, the top 70 of like 500 smart contracts on Ethereum that are governing like assets and tokens and stable coins, they are holding about equivalent of 2.5 million ETH that are already having their administrative keys exposed on chain. So those are not just the keys that sign transactions. These are the keys that can mint, it can burn. Imagine if it's a USDC admin key, it means that it can mint stablecoins out of thin air with no backing behind them. That it has a lot bigger risk operationally and like legally than just like losing the value of Bitcoin going down. So that has been so far very much underexplored, and it's good for, we are also seeing in our conversations some institutions starting to kind of get worried and get moving about it and try to understand what it is their actual exposure and what they should be starting to do about it. Google also calculated that a fast clock cryptographic array quantum computer could actually crack those keys in less than 15 hours once it exists. So once it's kind of starts cascading, it's going to cascade very, very fast, within a day, and we may not be even have enough time to react. So Google ties all of that first order administrative vulnerability to roughly 200 billion of, again, that are already exposed. We don't know how much of them are going to get exposed in the next couple of years and this year. And Google also estimating that if you take the 1,000 highest net worth accounts that are holding about 20 million of ETH, they can be compromised, all of them together, with that fast clock computer in about 9 days. So that estimates about 40 million ETH that are staked and exposed to consensus layer vulnerability, and around 50 million ETH sitting in L2s and bridges that are also exposed through code and data availability vulnerabilities. And also like ransom leverage and bridges and like all of that needs to be assessed very, very carefully. It needs to be patched, it needs to be upgraded. So this is now no longer just a generic or cryptocurrency security story. People who are tied in this exposed stuff is BlackRock, is JPMorgan, is Franklin Templeton, is Visa, is DTCC, Fidelity, Circle, Tether, all of the stablecoins, all of the staking pools, all of the bridges, all of the collateral, market structure, market making. All of it is now getting worried it needs to be upgraded. So the clean bridge back to between Coinbase and this Google paper is that Google kind of quantified what the exposure is today, and Coinbase agreed on its urgency.
No, definitely, Dariia. I think the short answer is that as neither of the reports have kind of contested that it is not a today's problem and it is not a problem for the institution. So I think you have highlighted correctly that this is no longer a generic crypto security story. This is a BlackRock, JPMorgan, Franklin, Visa, DTCC, Fidelity, stablecoin, staking, bridge, collateral, market structure story. And the clean bridge back to Coinbase is very simple. Google quantified the institutional blast radius, and Coinbase has validated the urgency of it. So I mean, this particular idea was something that was very much missing, because institutions were usually feeling that okay, this is something that might take years to happen, but I think the urgency has been created by the Coinbase, and the Google has already quantified that needs to be done right now. And that is where I think EternaX goes beyond and above in producing the risk exposure framework report, which we will again link in the description for all the institutions who are dealing, like BlackRock, JPMorgan, Franklin, and anybody on that list, or even banks or anybody for that matter who wants to do anything in the crypto space. I would suggest that they refer that report as their benchmark kind of, I would say, mitigation strategy. in their board meetings. It is a kind of it helps them to frame the problem in their boardrooms and understand at depth what is going to happen. Where does EternaX go beyond Coinbase and Google report, Dariia, in kind of providing what implications it can have on the institutions?
Right. So we have also released our own report about that. That's been based largely on the conversations that we had with this industry and the regulatory and the banks, and everybody had more questions than answers. So we decided we obviously had to contribute with the knowledge that we have collected internally for months and make it more helpful and make it more educative for the space and for the institutions. And it actually came out about 2 days before the Google's report, and talks very complementary to what Google has said. So the institutional diagnosis that we have added is making the core argument that the market is now aware of the quantum threat, but it still continues to create cryptographic migration debt. So every dollar of tokenization of stablecoins that they are issuing is gonna have to be migrated between today and, let's say, 2029. So what EternaX in this report defined migration debt is compounding operational, governance, liquidity, privacy, and reputational costs that institutions are taking on themselves and are going to incur when they issue long duration value on quantum vulnerable rails. So the main distinguisher there is that the value of the assets that they are issuing is now longer than the lifetime value of the security, and I mean safety, of the chains that they are issuing them on. So we are NIST, federal governments, Google, Coinbase, now saying that we are going to have to sunset elliptic curve cryptography on which all of these chains are based on by 2029, 2032, whatever. But these assets that continue to issue on elliptic curve cryptography have a longer lifetime. So institutions that continue to do that basically take on that they are going to have to migrate them, and they are going to incur this, again, operational hurdles, governance, possible stop of business for days or weeks at a time, liquidity issues, possible reputational costs if something goes haywire. That matters a lot because it turns this from a science problem to actual board decision problem. So when you decision to issue or tokenize, are you actually aware of everything that you're taking on and what the chain is going to look like in 2 to 3 years from now? So the issue is not just what happens when the cryptography relevant quantum computer arrives. The issue is what happens between today at that time, is what are institutions doing today that will later expose them to expensive coordination, to migration, to disclosure, to vendor alignment, and market, inevitably, repricing. So we have listed specifically the institutions that are, we collect 27 of them that are already being exposed and continue to raise this exposed value. Those include BlackRock, their Build program, their JPMorgan's Money program, Franklin Templeton, Visa's stablecoin settlement programs, DTCC tokenizations, Wisdom Tree, Fidelity. Fidelity has more than one even, all the major stablecoin issuers. And we have described very, very detailedly the framework that ties these named programs into more than 3 trillion in assets under management, under administration, or settlement custody, plus 320 billion in stablecoins, plus 36 billion in tokenized RWAs already, that in volume in 2025 have together produced upwards of 33 trillion in transactions. So the problem here is now not the mass, it's a control plane. And we, in the report, explain it pretty, pretty clearly that the risk is not wallets, it's more so for institutions, it's mint authority. It's authority to burn, it's authority to freeze, the controls to pause, the controls to upgrade, the reserve proofs, the upgrade of smart contracts, the transfers, the bridges, the oracles for prices of things, the custodies, providers for all of these institutions, and settlement authorization. So what EternaX does in the report is kind of translates the warning that Coinbase did, and the Google also blast radius that they have calculated into specifically an institutional risk roadmap.
Definitely, Dariia. I think this puts it into perspective that what we at EternaX have been committing to safeguarding the institutions. And in the current report, we have this particular section where we understand the liabilities which any institution is trying to take. And the core and the sharpest framework is that the debt, cryptographic migration debt that we are saying, it starts accruing at the issuance time itself. And it's not at the post-quantum break time. So we want institutions to think about this liability in very deep. Do they really want to carry this debt, or they want to become debt free and issue on a post-quantum native blockchain, that is EternaX, day one? So what Coinbase says is prepare now. Google says that the blast radius is already huge, and EternaX, that is us, we say that we understand the liability you are still creating while you are delaying. So if you are active in the space like JPMorgan, BlackRock, Franklin Templeton, Visa stablecoin settlements, DTCC, Wisdom Tree, Fidelity, or anybody in that segment, if you are trying to issue anything on blockchain, then this report needs to be very, very thoroughly read, and you have to understand the liability that you are creating on day one because of your decisions. So this is what we have framed, Dariia, and one thing becomes very clear is that people have seen two very big hacks. One hack was on the drift, which was 285 million, and the another hack was somewhere around 292 million. The figures can be somewhat million or change different, but what I'm trying to say here is we have seen a collective of hacks of almost 600 million in past 2 to 3 weeks. And if the institutions do not react with the understanding of post-quantum risk, then these kind of hacks can happen with them as well. The whole reason is the post-quantum or the quantum computers would be able to hack your keys and subsequently take the money out. And then it is not a matter of cost and return, because this is an argument which usually comes that post-quantum is very expensive, how will they kind of run? Because if the quantum computer running cost is even $599 million, then they will still run it to make a hack of $600 million. So that is the kind of scale that we are talking about. And if there are institutions who are doing billions, which we have already highlighted and you have highlighted, Dariia, as well, is that there is 3.2 trillion in assets under management, which is going to come pretty soon. There are 317 billions just in stablecoin, 36 billion just in tokenized RWA, 33 trillion in the stablecoin transaction volume. Then this number of 600 million looks very small. So hacks like this can still kind of take all the money out eventually, and the hacks can become bigger and bigger. So this is something which institutions have to really understand in the current scenario, and this is where we come as EternaX as the solution. So we have so far discussed, Dariia, the problems. We have discussed that Coinbase is saying prepare now. Google has been saying that the blast radius is already huge, and we in our report have already highlighted that what is your liability and as an institution. So now we will discuss what is the solution. What are we actually offering? And if Coinbase is warning and EternaX has diagnosed us correctly, then what is the solution now?
Well, the answer that should be taken for this is to stop treating quantum vulnerability, specifically for like stablecoins and tokenized assets, as a retrofit problem, and start treating it as the new issuance infrastructure problem. Okay, it's like there's not much you can do today about the stuff that you already issued that already has migration debt that you gotta have to migrate it, but you can still do better for the new value that is projected to be a more order of magnitude higher. So you have to think about that, between today and 2030, only 10% of the stable coins and the values that are gonna be tokenized are already tokenized, but the 90% are still able to save themselves from this migration debt and from this operational and economic risks. So the question that should be actually asked is which infrastructure lets the institutions to actually issue, migrate in safety to custody, to trade, to settle long duration value on a safety that is longer duration than the value of the asset and not vulnerable to quantum computers in a couple of years. So how do you not create this migration debt day one when you take the decision to issue and when you actually go on and make this commitment? So what EternaX calls this category is post-quantum market infrastructure. The stack of a post-quantum market infrastructure is to issue, migrate, custody, trade, and settle. Things that you do with these assets. That means that issuance has to be post-quantum native for new stablecoins, for new tokenized assets. Migration rails have to exist to move from legacy exposed assets to the post-quantum safety. Custody controls have to be post-quantum safe, and auditable privacy, that is also post-quantum safe, has to be there to protect institutions and their make sensitive flow and their sensitive data should not be made permanently public like it is on chains like Ethereum or Solana. So Coinbase directly actually strengthens this claim because in their paper they say that signature size is now first order, the biggest architectural constraint for legacy chains. So it means it's not a side issue, not something that you can just upgrade. Oh, we're going to lose some TPS, that's fine. You lose from half to 90% of TPS if you just upgrade. And this has been demonstrated by Solana testnet losing 90% of their TPS after upgrade to post-quantum signatures. So it is a very big issue for legacy chains. Something central that we need to discuss is that whether a chain can actually become PQ-safe, institutional, real, fold the volumes of the market and the speeds of the market that we have become accustomed to in the space. So in the report, we also position our own solution to that problem that is a lot better than what any incumbent legacy chain can obtain, because we make this post-quantum native day one with privacy, with on-chain footprint of this post-quantum safety at just 160 bytes that allows us to achieve basically unmatched performance and the TPS.
Yeah, definitely, Dariia. I think this is something which probably we were discussing much before than the Coinbase report came out and even the Google report came out, because this kind of a performance pressure was kind of highlighted as a post-quantum cryptography size problem, and we had noted this understanding much before and highlighted, and basically we have been working around this. So we have solved this, Dariia, at EternaX, and the TPS that we are achieving which is again post-quantum is more than upwards of 100k TPS, which we are able to achieve in the current setup in our designs that we have said. So this is something that should be at the market speed, which is acceptable to the institutions. So the real price, Dariia, what you are saying here is not retrofitting on the old rails under stress. Do not issue on the old rails. That is what we are trying to say. If you issue, you are taking the migration debt. Do not issue. The second is that the real price is owning the rail where, the BlackRock, JPMorgan, Franklin, Visa, DTCC, Fidelity, and the next wave of stablecoin and RWA can launch post-quantum from the inception. From the base, you can issue debt-free, migration debt-free, kind of stablecoins or whatever you want to do, money market funds. It can be anything that you want to do. So what we are trying to say is that you can issue PQ native day one with auditable privacy so that nobody knows anything about your transactions. It's completely institutionalized. It has selective disclosures for the regulatory authorities, which works very well for the institutions. And you can do all that which is post-quantum safe with market speed. So this is what we are saying. So connect with us and issue with us post-quantum native day one at market speed with auditable privacy. That is what we are trying to. Let's make it practical, very, very practical, Dariia. What are the 5 things, Dariia, the institutions should kind of do where they want to, as a next step?
Well, what they should do is they should start understanding what they're dealing with and what they can do to get to the other side of the quantum risk. So that would be like, let's say, 5 things. First is inventory and audit the full signing parameter. So it's the keys to mint, burn, to freeze, to pause, the keys to upgrade smart contracts, whatever is the transfer agent logic, the multisigs, the bridges attesters, the oracles, custodies, policy agent, everything has to be listed down and it has to be accounted for. The chain migration does not automatically migrate all of that. You're going to have to migrate those every single one by one. Second step is to separate legacy exposure and new issuance. So the legacy books, they are going to require long migration and operational transition of everything I just listed. But the new stablecoins and tokenized funds, tokenized deposits, or settlement products launched today is still a decision that you can take already knowing what the risks are and willing or not to take them on, and without creating fresh migration debt. Third step is to actually demand from this all of the first part that you are exposed already to a disclosed specific roadmaps. So Coinbase specifically highlighted that there is very big uncertainty. And that uncertainty in the crypto industry and the chains is deterring investment. So people are not willing, institutions, not willing to create more migration debt. They want to wait until they have a clear path either to migration or to issuance on a market infrastructure that's fast enough and PQ safe. So decisions need to be reached sooner rather than later, and they need to be made detailed and they need to be made public. So if a vendor or chain just says, oh, we're monitoring the situation, or oh, we're going to do something, that's not a roadmap. Fourth step is that you have to model the execution quality under post-quantum assumption. You have to understand whether the chains that you have already issued on, once they upgrade to post-quantum, are they able to satisfy performance targets. So if the team of the chains itself has not modeled like in the roadmap, throughput, latency, fees, gas, storage growth, user migration for all of that, it is not yet a deployable roadmap. You have to demand more. Coinbase is making it explicit that the signature size is very, very big architectural constraint for everybody, and there's very few who are actually solving it today. And the fifth would be that you have to also think about privacy, making it part of the architecture. Because in a Google report says the threat to encryption is already relevant today because there is store now, decrypt later attacks. And EternaX answer to that is to combine post-quantum safety and auditable privacy as byproduct of one another, not just as a bolt-on on top. So the point is not just having safer keys, it's also safer and faster market structure. So post-quantum should not be really just viewed as a threat. It should be viewed as an opportunity to make our systems better and safer and more private.
I think this was very, very comprehensive, and in just a single sentence, if I have to say that they have to pay a lot of attention on the current exposures that they have to speak to their custody operators, wallet operators, and bridges, whoever they are interacting with, and the chains, and they have to ask hard questions. And if the answer is that we don't have a roadmap, then it's a red flag. If the answer is we are making the roadmap, and if they have to then analyze the roadmap and they see that their long-term assets which they are issuing, they cannot deal with so much risk, that also is a problem. So they have to understand.
If you call your custody provider and you ask him, what's our post-quantum strategy? And he replies, that's not good.
Yeah, absolutely, Dariia. I mean, that is, and if they say it is EternaX, then that is the correct answer, because EternaX is day one post-quantum safe with a privacy which is day one post-quantum safe. So what we are saying is you not only get the security on day one, which is post-quantum safe, nobody can steal your funds, and your auditable privacy is also post-quantum safe. So it is not a situation where whatever you hide today will be revealed to the world in the world where there is a post-quantum computer, and in that world, you do not want the world to know what all you have done. So we save it day one, that is today. So if you are issuing or doing any transaction between 2026 and 2029, and you think it needs to be hidden from the world towards the eternity, then I think EternaX is the solution for you. Do not go with Solana, do not go with Ethereum. That is what we are saying currently, but I mean that's what is in the report. We would suggest you refer the report for detailed understandings of these things. And it is not coming. We are a team of 3 PhDs and lead cryptographer, that is Dariia. So it's not hand wavy, nothing. We are coming up with a paper soon. The paper launch is happening within a couple of weeks. You will get the scientific paper of our scheme from our team within couple of weeks. And this is something that is very much grounded in the scientific work that we have spent a lot of time on. So the bottom line, Dariia, here is, I'll recap what you have said in the entire podcast. Coinbase is the anchor. Coinbase Independent Advisory Board report has now put that the institutional grade credibility is behind a position the market cannot no longer dismiss. And the quantum computing should not be ignored. The threat is not imminent, but it is on the horizon. Migration is needed at both the consensus layer and the execution layer. And waiting for it to become urgent is not a plan. When I say not a plan, it is not a plan for anybody. Your custody provider, securitized, tokeny, anybody. It is not a plan for them. If they don't have a plan, request for a plan. If they don't come to EternaX. We will give you a plan. Google is the blast radius proof that Google has shown that this is not just a Bitcoin story. It is a BlackRock story. It is a JPMorgan story. Franklin Templeton, Visa, DTCC, Fidelity, stablecoins, staking, bridge and market structure story with concrete Ethereum exposure numbers already on the table. They haven't considered Solana, they haven't considered Hyperliquid, but we have considered their exposures in the report. So we suggest that you look at those numbers. It is not only restricted to Bitcoin, it is a story across crypto. EternaX is the diagnosis, Dariia, and it is the bet. The problem is not only the future break risk, the problem is the current migration debt creation. And the winning category is not who upgrades later, it is who offers post-quantum market infrastructure at market speed without any performance problems at day one, and that is EternaX. So this is the real divide, Dariia, and after Coinbase, the market has far less room to pretend otherwise. And I would end the podcast on these lines. Thank you to all the listeners. We will see you back again on some exciting post-quantum developments in the future. Till then, wish you all the luck, and we will link all the Coinbase report and the EternaX institutional exposure report in the description for your review.
Thank you, everyone, and see you in the next episodes of The Control Loop.